Get ready for Europe's next big crisis.
European Union institutions act beyond the scope of competence granted by the Republic of Poland in the treaties.
Poland's constitutional court, whose members are picked by Parliament's sitting majority, siding with the government last week and challenging the legal order under which all member states defer to the European Court of Justice. Warsaw insists he's got no intention of leaving the EU, but could the Poles push the bloc to breaking point? The standoff poses a bigger challenge than Brexit, warns the Financial Times, quote, corroding the union's integrity from within. We'll ask our panel about the long spiraling standoff over Poland's pressure put on judges, journalists, LGBT rights activists, and more. With its illiberal bend, is Poland reneging on what it signed on to when it joined the EU back in 2004? Those attending Sunday's mass protests across the country certainly think so. It's neighbors like Hungary and the Czech Republic who will now be keeping close tabs on Brussels' next move. Brussels, which is sitting on 36 billion euros in pandemic recovery funds due to Poland. How's it playing in the court of European public opinion? What with citizens split between those outraged by nations who rake in development aid without playing by the rules, and those who agree that national sovereignty does come first. Today in the France 24 debate, we're wondering if there really is, are we really on the road to Polexit? With us from Brussels, France 24 correspondent Dave Keating. Dave, did I pronounce that right? Do you say Polexit or Polexit? How do you say it?
I'm saying Polexit, yeah.
Polexit,
that's what we're going
okay.
with.
It's new off the tongue here. Jacek Saryusz-Wolski, member of the European Parliament from Poland's ruling Law and Justice Party, the PiS, also joins us from Brussels. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Hello.
From Gdansk in Poland, Karolina Zbytniewska, editor-in-chief of news website Euractiv Poland. Welcome to the show.
Good evening.
And Sidine Spector, professor of philosophy at the Sorbonne University, author of No Demos, Sovereignty and Democracy in the Face of the European Challenge. Thanks for joining us from the French capital.
Hello.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Polexit is fake news. That's what Poland's prime minister tweeted this Monday, reacting to the previous day's mass protests with some 100,000 in the streets of Warsaw rallying for the pro-EU opposition. James Mulholland has that story.
A call of unity from the previous president of the European Council. Tens of thousands of Poles on Sunday answered opposition leader Donald Tusk's call to rally in the capital Warsaw and across the country. They fear the ruling Law and Justice Party could spark an exit from the European Union after Poland's top court rejected the supremacy of EU laws and values, challenging a key tenet of European integration.
Dobrze wiemy, dlaczego oni chcą wyjść z Unii Europejskiej. Tak naprawdę, żeby właśnie bezkarnie gwałcić prawa obywateli, gwałcić zasady demokracji.
Protesters flooded Warsaw's Castle Square in the historic centre, holding Polish and EU flags together in a show of unity and support for European values.
Rząd PiS pomimo zapewnień, że chcemy zostać w Unii Europejskiej jako kraj członkowski, wszystko robi, żebyśmy w tej Unii nie zostali.
Jarosław Kaczynski, leader of the ruling right-wing party, says he doesn't want what's being called a Polexit. But language recently used by top party members could suggest otherwise. And their supporters too say they've had enough of Brussels.
Jest Unia, są urzędnicy Brukseli, a coraz więcej chcą się wtrącać. Bardzo się cieszę z orzeczenia, że w Polsce jest najważniejsza konstytucja.
The EU has warned that the court ruling may have consequences for the disbursement of Poland's COVID recovery funds, which the Polish government has slammed as blackmail.
Jacek Saryusz-Wolski, you agree that it's the right call to no longer recognize the European Court of Justice's prerogatives when it comes to having final say on important legal matters?
Polish Constitutional Court says the same thing as has been said by the German Constitutional Court, French Conseil d'État, Italian, Spanish, Romanian, Lithuanian, Danish, 10 altogether courts said that EU has no competences going beyond what is deferred upon them on the treaties as stipulated in Article 5. So Polish court says that supremacy of the EU law is valid only within the competences ultra vires, as lawyers say, and is not binding beyond those. And this is the same line as since years has been taken by German and 9 other constitutional courts. The reaction is hysteric, it's panic, it's fake, it's used for the political purposes. It's completely unreasonable. Polish opposition and Polish governing coalition are in favor of staying in the EU, and so the Polish nation. I was the chief negotiator of Polish membership in the EU, and with full authority of such, I state that this is a rubbish, fake hysteria.
So, Jacek, let me just ask you, just to be clear, because you said within what is competences for the European Union, does that mean that if there is a ruling from the ECJ pertaining to rule of law, Poland will abide by it?
That depends in which area. If it is about justice, it is beyond the area. It is not the competence of the EU. If it is about immigration, it is beyond the competences of the EU. As much as French Conseil d'État said that on data retention and on time of work of French soldiers, the verdicts of ECJ go beyond the competences. And the same was said in Solange 1 case, Solange 2 case, Lisbon Treaty case, and recently ECB case by Federal Constitutional Tribunal of Germany in Karlsruhe. And as I said, also by Spanish court on the case of the Catalan leader, by Italian court, by Romanian court also on justice, by Lithuania, and by Denmark. So it is nothing special.
Yeah,
it is
nothing special, you say.
It is just the same line as has been said. EU has primacy of its law and competence only where the competences were given or deferred to it as defined in Article 5 of the treaty, which sets the limits of EU competence, the title of the Article 5. Beyond that, it has no competence.
Karolina Zipiniewska, do you agree? Is this your reading of? Is this, Karolina, your reading of the rules when Poland joined the European Union?
In my view, the ruling by the Polish Constitutional Court creates a fake illusion of existing clash between the Polish legal system and the EU legal system that are intertwined since, as you are saying, we have entered the European Union in 2004, and the latest EU court's rulings have been aimed at protecting the laws that are also inscribed in the Polish constitution, meaning the Montesquieu's separation of powers and the independence of judiciary. So, in my view, there is no clash, and the ruling of the Polish Constitutional Court is a part of a political, ideological kind of politics that is being.
What do you mean by no clash?
Yes, there is no clash. The Polish legal system is a part of the European Union's acquis communautaire. Indeed, Polish constitution is the highest law of Poland, but at the same time, Poland, which is written in the constitution, is obliged to abide by the international treaties. And here comes also the European Union's acquis communautaire. So we don't have a clash. The European Union's Court of Justice ruled that there are some rulings that are not in line with the general rule, constitutional rule, also of Poland, of independence of judiciary, And now our government and our constitutional court want to have sovereignty, want to have power over our own judicial system, which they have, and which they have also in line with the general European legal order.
All right, let's listen to the European Justice Commissioner who expressed grave worry at the end of last week.
The Union is based on the primacy of the EU law, on the national laws and on the national provisions, also constitutional provisions, and the binding character of all the decisions of the ECJ.
Dave Keating, it's a little confusing because here he's talking about EU law and national laws. Where do the prerogatives end?
Well, I think what's important to point now, as the previous speaker was just mentioning, that the rulings that have been issued so far by EU courts that the Polish government has taken issue with are actually citing the Polish constitution. So this isn't necessarily a problem of whether the Polish constitution takes precedence over EU law. This is about who gets to decide that, which court is higher. And it is true, just as Didier Reynders was saying there, that when countries joined the EU, they agreed to the system by which the ECJ is the ultimate arbiter of that. And it is true that national constitutions are the foremost law, the highest law of any EU member state. But as part of the accession, they agreed to have the ECJ be kind of the top level of the court system, which is an acquis that includes national courts below it. And so what Commissioner Reynders there is really saying is essentially these were the terms by which you joined. These are the terms, for other EU countries that they created when the system was created. And at the end of the day, the ECJ is the one who decides this, not national courts.
And to Jacek Zarozolski's point that there are plenty of precedents where national courts like the German Constitutional Court, the French Conseil d'État, have gone against the ECJ.
So the Commission's argument on this is that, essentially, if you talk to people here, they say the only case that really comes close to what the Constitutional Tribunal in Poland has done is the German Constitutional Court. But the view is, and that was a ruling about bond buying. It was saying basically the EU doesn't have the authority to start bond buying, and the ECJ can't say that it does have that authority because it's not in the treaties by which Germany joined the EU originally. The difference there, the Commission says, is that that is an independent court. It is Germany's Supreme Court. This Constitutional Tribunal is not Poland's Supreme Court. It's a separate court. It's been there for a long time, but it is accused. Judges on that tribunal are being accused by the EU of having been politically appointed and basically being agents of the government. The phrase that people in Brussels are using here is puppet court, you hear kangaroo court, that this is essentially a government action, whereas the German Constitutional Court decision was an independent decision that the German government actually found very complicated. The German government was essentially opposing that decision. The Commission has taken action to try to resolve that issue with the German Constitutional Court. That is an open issue. It's not solved yet, but they are somewhat different situations.
City Inspector, what's the difference between Germany and Poland then?
I think there is a huge difference, actually. When you look at the Solange arrêt of the European Court of the Constitutional German Court, you see that actually they were fighting in order to keep the fundamental rights of individuals. So basically the idea was, you cannot have a federal order which could actually be a threat to individual rights. In the case of Poland, it's exactly the contrary. Actually, Poland is threatening individual rights and threatening the separation of powers. And Montesquieu was mentioned, which is also a philosopher that I rely on. You cannot join the EU, which is a club of democracies, and then say that you don't need any separation of powers, that you don't need an independent judiciary. So basically, Poland has accepted the Copenhagen criterion. Poland has accepted to join a club of democracy, and now it wants to change the rules, and that cannot be fair.
Is this an existential threat for the European Union?
I think that it could be an existential threat if other Eastern countries joined Poland, like Hungary, like the Czech Republic. Of course, it's a very serious threat. But I think that the Commission is perfectly right to say that, okay, if you want to have the benefit of the political association, you've been through a social contract, now you have to pay the price. And the price is, of course, the transfer of some parts of national sovereignty. National sovereignty is not an absolute. It's not, something that was like, Poland before the EU, before 2004. Now Poland has to share its sovereignty, and I think that you cannot have the benefits of the association without this.
Because, City Inspector, it's a unique experience, the European Union. These independent sovereign states effectively giving a little bit of that sovereignty to this supranational body.
Yes, absolutely. So sovereignty has been pooled. That means that when you join the club of democracy, when you join the EU, you cannot rule by yourself. You're not like, some kind of king, a sovereign king that could, do whatever he wants. So basically the idea is that you agree to pool part of your sovereignty, especially in very important matters like, well, there is a federal court and you have to obey by this judicial order. Since 1963, 1964, there is a general judicial order of the EU. And the idea is that also there is a theological interpretation, which has been made by the European Court of Justice, which means that since all the countries have to be closer and closer, then you can say that, the competences have to be as important as they should be in order for this end to happen. So basically, I don't think that the ECJ has gone too far. It is perfectly, in the line with what has happened since the 60s. And that was okay with all the countries that were member states at that time.
All right. EU critics might say there's been mission creep over the years at the European level. We'll pick up on that with our panel when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're looking at the showdown between Poland and the European Union, what with the Polish Constitutional Court refusing, saying it will refuse rulings from the European Court of Justice. One of the main principles of for signing on, say critics of Warsaw. With us, Jacek Saryusz-Wolski, member of the European Parliament from Poland's ruling Law and Justice Party, the PiS. Also with us from Gdansk in Poland is Karolina Zybieniecka, editor-in-chief of the news website Euractiv Poland, City Inspector, professor of philosophy at Sorbonne University here in Paris. And joining us from Brussels is France 24 correspondent Dave Keating. Jacek Saryusz-Wolski, in part one of our discussion, you said you were one of those who negotiated Poland's entry into the European Union back in 2004. Over the years, the club's gotten bigger. We're now up to 27 members in the EU. Some are closer in integration than others, what with the Eurozone and those who are in or out of the Schengen agreement zone when it comes to migration policy. Do you feel as though what you signed up for in 2004 is what's being delivered in Brussels today?
I think that the European project has been derailed and departs from what is in the treaties and departs from what was the thought of the founding fathers like Schuman and de Gasperi and others. It's been taken over by some hegemonic forces who control now both the parliament and the executive.
Who are those hegemonic forces?
It is not by accident that the main one is Franco-German couple, because they do support the EU taking actions beyond the treaty-based competences, knowing that there is no agreement and no possibility to change the treaties. they go beyond the treaties. So the rule of law is being violated by European Commission, by European Court of Justice, and by the political forces of the mainstream and and biggest countries who are behind them. We know the treaties better than the old members because we are fresher members. I've been myself 8 years Europe Minister negotiating since 91 until 2001 Polish accession. And we know what we have subscribed to, what are the Copenhagen criteria. We are sick of being lectured and tired. What is EU, what is supremacy of law. I've been teaching for more than 20 years EU integration to the students, and those comments which came in this debate, I can assure you that those persons would not pass, would fail an exam of EU legal and institutional system.
Well, hold on a sec. So Céline Spector there earlier was saying the difference between Germany and Poland is in Germany, the Constitutional Court is an independent body. In Poland, your Constitutional Court, they're named by Parliament, which is controlled by your party.
It is not true, because the chair of the German Constitutional Court is a politician taken from CDU Bundestag, named by the politicians. The judges are named by politicians. The German political system and judges are much more politicized, and Polish much less politicized, contrary to what has been spread in the media. So it is fundamentally untrue saying that the Polish tribunal is less independent than German. The opposite is true. And take the Conseil d'État of France. It is the same case. These are political nominees to much higher degree. Who has the right to nominate the top judges, if not the supreme authority, which is Parliament in parliamentary democracy? It is perfectly in agreement with the democratic principles. And the real problem is that those who accuse Poland think and even say that the new democracies, which are not new because Polish constitution is the oldest democratic constitution of Europe and the second in the world after the American one. So we have been democracy much earlier than France and Germany, saying that we are a worse kind of democracy. And with this patronizing and condescending attitude towards Central Eastern Europe.
But isn't part of democracy, excuse me, isn't part of democracy, Jacek, defending minority rights? And over the past 6 years, we've seen a curtailing of abortion rights, a curtailing of LGBT rights. Isn't it the European Union's role to step up?
Look, I will not enter into this debate because it's based on fake accusations and we have no time to get into it. But it is a matter of national democracy, not transnational EU democracy. The essence is that our democracies are treated differently, double standards. Second, and it is something I call Euro racism. And second, that the will of those mighty is being enforced upon those who are weaker, and the financial blackmail is being used. Our countries are not for sale, and any financial blackmail, giving or refusing money, will not work.
Karolina Zybiniecka, you agree?
Yes, I would like to provide three advocems to what Mr. Saryusz Wolski just said. So first, the Karlsruhe's Federal Court ruling was about Europeization of European debt, while the Polish Constitutional Court ruling was about the very fundamentals of integration, of European integration, including denying the rights written in the treaties, so the Article 1 and Article 2 and Article 19 of the Treaty of the European Union. Second, Franco-German couple as a hegemonic power that imposes something on other nation states of the European Union we, as Poland, had the right to be a part of this power couple within the Weimar Triangle, but Poland decided that we prefer to criticize it from the outside instead of shaping this axis of decision making. And the third one, the most important, European project has been derailed. In my opinion, the Polish project of liberal democracy has been derailed instead. When discussing the Polish Constitutional Court's ruling in the overall context, has to be pointed at. We have been, as Poland, in the coherent process since peace, law and justice came to power in 2015. So United Rights government for 6 years now has undertaken the overall transformation of the existing democratic order under the cover of identity, sovereignty, dignity politics. It included the process of advancing xenophobia that you've already mentioned, directed against the refugees in the beginning, the Muslims also in the beginning, but then to our own communities. So LGBTQI community against our women who want to have a power of choice. The government has been promoting nationalism, including supporting just recently during yesterday's rallies, supporting neo-fascists with the taxpayers' money within the so-called Patriot Fund. There has been ongoing subordination of the judiciary that we are now discussing under the cover of setting it free. So there are many covers.
Many covers indeed, and there are many aspects to what's going on in Poland. But I just want to talk for a second here about how this is playing out in the rest of the EU. Here in France, for instance, we have a presidential election campaign kicking off, and there are plenty of Eurosceptic candidates siding with the Polish government. For instance, here's a tweet from Marine Le Pen, the leader of the far-right National Rally Party. She's saying, by affirming that its constitutional law supersedes European legislation, Poland is exercising its legitimate and inalienable right to sovereignty. City Inspector, your thoughts on this? And by the way, it's not just the far right in France where you have candidates who are siding with Poland on this one.
Yes, actually.
Montebourg, Barnier.
Of course. But the European law is extremely clear. Community law supremacy is over all conflicting national legal rules. So I think that maybe some candidates have forgotten that France has to respect the treaties and that now France is actually committed to a certain amount of legal rules. So there is this kind of wish among our presidential candidates who would like to imagine that France could recover its national sovereignty, like, for instance, the United Kingdom, take back control. But this is a myth. And we have to actually live together and stand together within globalization. And it's totally childish to imagine that all our different member state countries can recover their national sovereignty and do as if there were no treaties. So I'd like to come back to the idea of double standard that was mentioned first. There is no double standard, but that means that all the member states have to comply to the same rules. And that's exactly why we have a European Court of Justice.
Jacek Zarowolski?
Chère Madame, would you call Barnier Eurosceptic? Would you call Montebourg Eurosceptic? Would you call the proposal by Barnier, the twice commissioner, foreign minister of France, who says that there are limits to the EU competences and he proposes a constitutional shield? You are simply contradicting and ignoring Article 5, who says, and Article 4, who says that EU has competences only those which were conferred upon it by the member states and all other competences belong to the member states. This is the letter of EU treaty. What you are speaking about are illusions of those who want to go by far beyond and further than what is in the treaties without democratic legitimacy. It's profoundly undemocratic. It's contrary to the spirit of the treaties, and it's destroying from within the EU. You are hurting the EU and its integrity by this posture.
City Inspector, let me bring in Céline on this. City Inspector, you what's your answer very briefly, because I want to get David on this.
It's quite interesting indeed. I think that in Wangen laws, and I'm sure that you've known it, in 1963, the court enunciated, the radical doctrine of direct effect and concluded that, treaty is more than an agreement which creates mutual obligation between the contract states. It constitutes a new legal order, the subjects of which comprise not only member states, but also their nationals. So do you really know EU law?
All right, let me bring in on this Dave Keating.
Well,
Dave,
I'm afraid you don't know the treaty, Article 5, about the competences.
Dave
because
Keating.
It is clearly said in the treaties that it is not the EU competence what was not conferred upon it, and it is directly applicable and stems from the EU Treaty Article 5 and 4. So no theological, philosophical explanations will lead you to prove that member states have signed the check in blanco to give absolute supremacy to EU in every possible area of law.
All right, let me bring in, please. Let me bring in Brussels correspondent Dave Keating. Dave, here we have it. We're in 2021 now, and we have seen over the last couple of years with the COVID pandemic, suddenly the Health Commission has taken on a greater role. Now we have an energy crisis, and there's talk about pooling energy, mutualization of energy purchases. We've seen bond buying at the European level for the first time. The EU is gaining in responsibility. So in that respect, it is changing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, so much of EU integration has been driven by crisis. Countries agree. The natural instinct of any national capital here is going to be to preserve power. There is a reticence to hand over sovereignty. And it's a trade-off, as the earlier speakers were saying, that things will change when a country joins the EU. They get benefits from EU membership, but then in exchange, they have to hand over some sovereignty. But I think that there is clearly some confusion here among politicians and some disagreement. I have to say, the point with Barnier's comments in France, I mean, people in Brussels were very horrified by what he said. It doesn't matter that he's from the center right and not the far right. I think there is a feeling here that...
And just to be clear on Michel Barnier, just to be clear on Michel Barnier here, he said it was when it comes to immigration matters, because he's now a candidate for president, the former EU envoy for Brexit saying that there should be national sovereignty that trumps European sovereignty.
Yes, and there's definitely a legal case actually there to be made that external borders are a national competence. But certainly what he was suggesting, the difficulty is when he waded into the courts, because the big question is, who's the final arbiter of any of this? And what Barnier was suggesting is that the EU courts are not. Now, I think there's a feeling that Barnier's political party has some ground to make up with the far right. They're not doing very well, and they need to kind of lure people over from the far right. I think the attitude here was to not take what he said very seriously, not to take him at his word. We'll see. That is, if he ever emerges as a serious presidential candidate. But I think that the main issue here is a lot of the stuff does need to be openly discussed, right? There's clearly disagreement on among national politicians about what is an EU competence, what is not an EU competence, and which court gets to rule on that. There shouldn't be disagreement. It's all in the treaties. But if this stuff is unclear, maybe it's time for another treaty revision period. And that's a big Pandora's box that national leaders are afraid to open. But another period of treaty revision could iron out a lot of this stuff. And if Central and Eastern European countries feel that some of these things are either unclear or unfair, that's something that could be resolved in a treaty revision process. But almost all national capitals in the EU don't want to see that happen.
Almost all of them don't want to see it happen. And I just want to anticipate on Tuesday's news cycle, we're going to be getting a speech from the Brexit minister. He'll be in Lisbon. He wants the ECJ, the European Court of Justice, barred from overseeing trade in Northern Ireland. This despite an agreement that keeps the UK nation inside the EU's free trade zone. The Daily Telegraph reports that David Frost will target the European Court of Justice in his speech, and he'll include red lines on the ECJ's role in the protocol, instead to be replaced by a form of international arbitration. Dave Keating, we don't really talk that much on the news about the European Court of Justice. Now it's going to become this outsized important thing?
Well, it was a huge issue during the Brexit negotiations. I think it kind of fell behind some of the bigger, sexier issues. But this was a red line for the UK that kind of got fudged in the end. Because when Theresa May said Brexit means Brexit, she later explained that that means no jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice over the UK. And the problem was the EU said, look, if you want access to the single market, if you want to be part of the single market, there has to be a court that decides on the rules of that single market. You have to be subject to that. Now, they did escape ECJ jurisdiction over the FTA. For free trade agreements, ECJ jurisdiction isn't necessarily necessary, but for the Northern Ireland Protocol, it is necessary. That's what the EU says, because Northern Ireland, under the divorce agreement, is effectively part of the EU customs union. And so therefore, the highest court in the EU has to be able to have some say in what goes on there. That's what the UK signed up to, but very begrudgingly, it did kind of already transgress the red lines that they had set when they agreed to that. And so now there seems to be some going weak in the knees here as they actually have to implement this. They are falling back to a previous position about the ECJ, which they held before, but essentially then gave up on when they signed the agreement, and now they're bringing it back.
Jacek Zarowolski, what role should the European Court of Justice play in a dispute like that one, Northern Ireland?
On competence, on this question which reappears in our conversation, the competences were given by the member states to the EU under the treaties. But originally they are the competences of the EU member states. And as I said, Article 5 says that only those given are the competence of the EU, others are not. And there is a fundamental doctrine, elaborated, by the way, by the German Constitutional Tribunal, competence, which says that EU has no competence to establish its own competence. So who is the guardian? Whenever EU institutions go beyond the competences conferred upon them, the guardians are national constitutional courts. And for that reason, we need a second instance to control the ECJ, referring to your question. I propose in my paper under the Constitutional Committee of European Parliament for the Conference on the Future of Europe to create within the ECJ another chamber, subsidiarity chamber, composed of the presidents of the national constitutional courts, controlling ECJ rulings and the limits of the competences of the EU if they trespass or go beyond ultra-virus.
We're out of time. Karolina Zimieniewska, we're out of time. So just in 30 seconds or less, Dave Keating's idea of revisiting all the rules of revisiting the Nice Treaty, how would that fly?
I wanted to say, because it's, I think, important, this context of the Northern Irish Protocol, the thing that European Union comes in handy when the national order is not enough, when it doesn't suffice, when we need support. So the UK fears that the European Court of Justice will be siding with the EU member state. But here's why we have the EU to represent us and to boost our individual national power. And we are making again this talk about politics, about the existence of the European Union, about sovereignty, while the thing is, the reason of this talk is our Polish government's wish to subordinate the judiciary and dismantle democracy.
So much more to ask about. Karolina Zebeniecka, many thanks for joining us from Gdansk. I want to thank Sid Inspector here in Paris, Dave Keating and Jacek Zarowolski in Brussels. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.